Well, yes, there's been a few contradictions. The first one was the police statement on the night of the death of George Floyd, where there was no mention made of the fact a police officer had any sort of interaction with him. They said initially that there was a man who was under the influence who suffered some sort of medical problem and ended up dying. So that was the initial statement that came out from Minneapolis police. When that video was released and went viral, the anger erupted, and then we've seen other attempts or other pieces of information that have made people angry as well, and that issue of the autopsy, or the two different autopsies, one by the officials of the state that suggested that there was no asphyxiation, or if you like, a form of kind of strangulation, whereas this one today that's come out, an independent autopsy, has found something very, very different, that in fact it was the knee of that police officer that caused George Floyd's death.
Citizens who live in these once lovely communities. The mobs are devastating the life's work of good people and destroying their dreams. Right now, America needs creation, not destruction. Cooperation, not contempt. Security, not anarchy, and there will be no anarchy. Civilization must be cherished, defended, and protected. The voices of law-abiding citizens must be heard, and heard very loudly. We cannot and must not allow a small group of criminals and vandals to wreck our cities and lay waste to our communities. We must defend the rights of every citizen to live without violence, prejudice, or fear. We support the overwhelming majority of police officers who are incredible in every way and devoted public servants. They keep our cities safe, protect our communities from gangs and drugs, and risk their own lives for us every day. No one is more upset than fellow law enforcement officers by the small handful who fail to abide by their oath to serve and protect. My administration will stop mob violence, and will stop it cold. It does not serve the interest of justice or any citizen of any race, color, or creed for the government to give into anarchy, abandon police precincts, or allow communities to be burned to the ground. Won't happen. Those making excuses or justifications for violence are not helping the downtrodden, but delivering new anguish and new pain. From day one of my administration, we have made it a top priority to build up distressed communities and revitalize our crumbling inner cities. We fought hard with Senator Tim Scott and many others to create opportunity zones, helping to draw a surge of new investment to the places in our country that need it most. We must all work together as a society to expand opportunity and to create a future of greater dignity and promise for all of our people. We must forge a partnership with community leaders, local law enforcement, and the faith community to restore hope. Radical left criminals, thugs, and others, all throughout our country and throughout the world, will not be allowed to set communities ablaze. We won't let it happen. It harms those who have the least, and we will be protecting those who have the least.
And just those remarkable scenes of the president leaving the White House, I think there was just very short notice ahead of him making that speech where he said that the National Guard would be deployed, and then suddenly the streets were cleared and he was out walking the streets of Washington, D.C. Nobody expected that.
And no one here knew what was going on. That was what was quite extraordinary as well. None of the protesters knew that the president was right around that corner, walking in the streets, casually chatting to the reverend and the rector of that church that was set ablaze last night. So pretty extraordinary scenes here, and an attempt by the president, it seems, to project an image of strength and calm, when on this side of the barricades, as we just saw with that large group of protesters swarm through, there's still a whole lot of disorder, and it may get worse as the night goes on.
Sure. Well, night is falling. David Lipson, we'll leave it for now. We'll go back to you very soon to get the latest update from what's going on in Washington, D.C.
The United States wants an open and constructive relationship with China, but achieving that relationship requires us to vigorously defend our national interests. The Chinese government has continually violated its promises to us and so many other nations. These plain facts cannot be overlooked or swept aside. The world is now suffering as a result of the malfeasance of the Chinese government. China's cover-up of the Wuhan virus allowed the disease to spread all over the world, instigating a global pandemic that has cost more than 100,000 American lives and over 1 million lives worldwide. Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization and pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities. Countless lives have been taken and profound economic hardship has been inflicted all around the globe. They strongly recommended against me doing the early ban from China, but I did it anyway and was proven to be 100% correct. China has total control over the World Health Organization, despite only paying $40 million per year, compared to what the United States has been paying, which is approximately $450 million a year. We have detailed the reforms that it must make and engage with them directly, but they have refused to act. Because they have failed to make the requested and greatly needed reforms, we will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs. The world needs answers from China on the virus.
So I want to start by acknowledging the horrific tragedy in Minnesota of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd is absolutely tragic. That video that we saw, that I saw, that my staff saw, that the president saw. And the president put out a statement last night that at his request, the FBI and the Department of Justice are already well into an investigation as to the very sad and tragic death in Minnesota of George Floyd. I have asked for this investigation to be expedited and greatly appreciate all of the work done by law enforcement. My heart goes out to George's family and friends. Justice will be served. I can tell you that as I'm briefing you at this moment, the president is receiving a briefing from the Attorney General, Bill Barr, on this, and the Deputy Director of the FBI. So that is ongoing as I begin this briefing. Secondly, I want to transition into some news from SBA and Treasury that was announced that today the U.S. Small Business Administration, in consultation with the U.S. Treasury Department, announced that it is setting aside $10 billion of Round 2 funding for the Paycheck Protection Program to be lent exclusively to CDFIs. Those are community development financial institutions. CDFIs work to expand economic opportunity in low-income communities by providing access to financial products and services for local residents and businesses. So we're encouraged to see that. And then finally, before taking your questions, I wanted to address what has been going on Twitter and with social media. I believe it is time to, quote, get the facts about Twitter and other social media platforms targeting their bias against President Trump and conservatives online. If we were to judge the bias of Twitter and its top employees by their own words, the case would be an easy one to make. Twitter's head of site integrity has tweeted that there are, quote, actual Nazis in the White House, and no fact check label was ever applied to this absolutely outrageous, offensive, and false claim made against the White House and its employees. But let's judge Twitter based on their actions, not based on the words of its top employees, and its actions are no better. President Trump recently received a so-called fact check label for a tweet. It was a false fact check and an accurate fact check, but nevertheless, Twitter moved forward with it. Dan Scavino, the deputy chief of staff here, was the first user in the history of Twitter to receive a so-called, quote, manipulated media label for posting a video that played a verbatim clip. It is no coincidence that these two unbelievable interventions by Twitter were targeted against the President of the United States and one of the President's top advisors. This is bias in action. And while big tech is quick to censor the President, quick to censor some of his top employees, they are very reluctant, it seems, to label some of the actions by Chinese officials, some of the misinformation that has been spread by China. For example, to move off of Twitter and move to Google, they created a search engine for the Chinese Communist Party, which blacklisted searches for human rights and allowed for easy surveillance. Facebook and Twitter have both taken paid advertising that spread disinformation about China's mass imprisonment of religious minorities, and Twitter has allowed Chinese officials to use its platforms to spread misinformation about the coronavirus, undermine the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, and more. And then back in March, a Chinese official began spreading a conspiracy theory on Twitter, an egregious one, that our U.S. military was responsible for the spread of the coronavirus. And that tweet, that disinformation, it took all the way until today when we raised concerns about it to get a fact check. So they appear to be very hastily eager to censor President Trump and some of his employees, but a little reluctant when it comes to China. It's a bit befuddling. But no one believes in the First Amendment more than the president. The president will take action to ensure that big tech does not stifle free speech and that the rights of all Americans to speak, tweet, and post are protected. And finally, I just want to note one other action of Twitter that I learned just before walking out here, that on the Mueller report, their anti-Trump headlines were anti-Trump by a ratio of 76-1. That's extraordinary, and it's not just bias aimed at President Trump and his employees. It's also aimed at everyday Americans. It's aimed at the movie Unplanned, as Twitter suspended their account and then came up with an excuse in the aftermath. And then just another example, that liberals are allowed to incite violence against the Covington kids, who were in the end proven right, and their video was taken out of context, and yet these individuals were allowed by Twitter to incite violence. It's very disturbing to see. So those are some of the president's concerns, and with that, I will take questions.